Welcome to part 5 of the series where I'm tier ranking all 256 type of Twinborn combinations from Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series. In this part, I'll be ranking 16 more Twinborn types. As usual, some of these names come from the Mistborn adventure game Alloy of Law rulebook, but most of them were created by me and other users in the Exploring the Cosmere Discord server. If you're interested in helping come up with names for future parts in this series, make sure you join the Discord server. I'll link that in the description. Alright, let's get into this tier ranking. The first Twinborn type we have is Dueler. Duelers can use their allomantic bend alloy to speed up time in a bubble around themselves, and they can use their ferochemical pewter to store their physical strength. Okay, I think that this could be a pretty good combination of powers. So for instance, if a dueler is in a combat situation and they're fighting multiple opponents at once, they could single out one of their opponents and throw up their bend alloy bubble around themselves and that other person. So from their perspective, everything outside of the speed bubble would look like it's moving in very slow motion. But from somebody on the outside looking into the speed bubble, it looks like the two people inside of the speed bubble are moving at blurring speeds. Once they have their opponent in the bubble with them, they could tap their ferochemical pewter, increase their physical strength, and deal with that person, and then drop the bend alloy bubble and go on to the next person. I can't really think of any other good uses for this combination other than the combat situations. If you guys can think of any use cases that I miss for these combinations, let me know in the comment section. I'm going to put Dueler in A tier. The next type is Bumblebee. Bumblebees can use their allomantic aluminum to wipe internal allomantic reserves, and they can use their ferochemical copper to store memories. Okay, so a Bumblebee is an example of one of the gnats of the Twinborn world. Their aluminum is almost useless to them. Since they can't burn any other allomantic metals, burning their aluminum doesn't really do anything. But aluminum can be used if other forms of investiture are used on them. So it's most likely possible that if they were lashed by a knight's radiant, they would probably be able to burn their aluminum and get rid of that lashing. And of course, their ferochemical copper ability is pretty useful, especially if they were in an age before smartphones and cameras and things like that. But yeah, since one of their powers is only useful in a very niche circumstance, I'm going to put them in D tier. Now we have Loudmouth. Loudmouths can use their allomantic zinc to riot the emotions of others, and they can use their ferochemical aluminum to store their identity. So the name Loudmouth comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook, and Loudmouths have the reputation of being strongly opinionated and tough to sway. That's pretty interesting. Aluminum is one of the metals that we don't know much about ferochemically. So here from the Lost Metal Ars Arcanum, we have true self-fairings can store their spiritual sense of identity and an aluminum metal mind. This is an art rarely spoken of outside of Terrace communities, and even among them it is not well understood. We also have this section of Bands of Mourning. This is chapter 3. Marcy is talking to Vendel, and she says, so if a person can store their identity, as Waxelium does with his weight, they'd be without it for a time, a blank slate so to speak. So they could use anyone's metal mind, she asks. And Vendel says, possibly. Some have been experimenting with your idea, and early results are promising. So it's unclear if they would only be able to use other people's aluminum mines because that's what ferochemical power they have, or if they'd be able to use any metal mind of any other ferochemist, regardless of what ferochemical metal it is. So if they could blank their identity and then access literally anybody else's metal mines, that would be very, very useful. But until it's actually written into one of the Mistborn books, I can't really give ferochemical aluminum that edge. I'm gonna put it in C tier. I don't think ferochemical aluminum is that useful when that's your only ferochemical power. If you had access to more ferochemical powers, then that makes a big difference because then you could make unkeyed metal mines. Our next Twinborn type is Slick. Slicks can use their allomantic brass to soothe the emotions of others, and they can use their ferochemical chromium to store fortune. This name comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook. Slicks have the reputation of being smooth talkers and lucky varmints. Yeah, that checks out. They could use their allomantic brass to soothe the emotions of others and kind of manipulate the other people into doing what they want. We see this with Breeze in Arrow 1. He almost uses his brass all the time, just subconsciously. He's He's not even trying to purposely manipulate people. Yeah, and then ferrochemical fortune is another ferrochemical metal that we really don't know much about. The Ars Arcanum says that chromium pharynx can store fortune in a chromium metal mine, making themselves unlucky during active storage, and can tap it at a later time to increase their luck. For this tier ranking, I'm just going to go with the Ars Arcanum's definition of fortune. We know that fortune is used by the shards to kind of get a glimpse of the future, and we know that Hoid uses fortune to end up where he needs to be, but he doesn't always know why he needs to be there. But yeah, we're just gonna assume that it is talking about luck. I think an argument could be made that the way that Hoid uses fortune is basically like luck. He goes with the flow and ends up where he needs to be. So with that in mind, when you're actively storing your fortune, you might become very unlucky, and you might have a lot of bad circumstances happening all around you and possibly to you. So you would probably want to be in a very safe location and maybe away from other people and other sources of danger when you're actively storing your fortune. But then when you're tapping it at a later time, you'd probably have a lot of very convenient things happening to you. Maybe you would hit the lottery, right? Maybe you would be winning big on when you're gambling, things like that. And I think that coupled with the brass, it could make it very easy for a slick to win the trust of others, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I'm putting slick in B tier. I think the downsides of storing your fortune are pretty bad, so I can't put it super high. Next up, we have heartbeat. Heartbeats can use their allomantic bronze to hear allomantic pulses, and they can use their ferrochemical gold to store health. Okay, so we see allomantic bronze heavily used in Era 1. Marsh uses it all the time. He's a bronze misting, and then of course he becomes an inquisitor. That enhanced his allomantic bronze enough to let him pierce copper clouds. We also see Vin use it to pierce copper clouds. That also has to do with hemalurgy. She becomes really good at determining what metal other people are burning when she's burning their bronze, because the pulses have a different rhythm, basically, depending on what metal's being burned. So here's another good use of allomantic bronze that I forgot about. So Vin uses her allomantic bronze in the Well of Ascension chapter 20. She uses her allomantic bronze to detect what emotions Breeze was targeting when he was burning his allomantic brass and soothing Elend. She realized that Breeze was soothing away the nervousness, the anxiety, the worry from Elend to make him feel more confident. She was only able to do this when she used it along with Duralaman, but maybe Allomancers with the power of the original Allomancers, people that had consumed a bead of Lerasium, for instance, would be able to do this without Duralaman. So that's a pretty good use of bronze. And then of course, ferrochemical gold is really, really nice to have. It would suck to have to store your health because you're going to be sickly. Wayne talks about having to be in bed for weeks to store up enough health to heal from a bullet, for instance. But yeah, whenever you really need that health, it's there for you. I'm gonna put it in A tier. Next up, we have Boiler. Boilers can use their allomantic copper to hide allomantic pulses, and they can use their ferrochemical brass to store warmth. The name Boiler comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook. Boilers have the reputation of being excellent survivalists that are tough to track down. That's a good reputation for this type. They'd be suited to survive in a variety of different climates. For instance, they could go into a desert and they could just constantly be storing their body heat and their brass mine to stay cool, or they could go into a blizzard, and as long as they had warmth stored up, they could just draw on that warmth and warm their body up so they don't even notice the cold. And then using their allomantic copper, they could hide out in whatever environment they're currently in, and it would be extremely hard to track them down, even with the use of allomantic bronze. Another good thing about copper is that it shields you from emotional allomancy. A lot of people that have allomantic copper constantly burn it so that they knew that they weren't being manipulated by soothers or rioters. Both of these powers are pretty good to have, but I don't really think that they build on one another. I'll put it in B tier ahead of Slick. Next up, we have Manipulator. Manipulators can use their allomantic zinc to riot emotions of others, and they can use their ferrochemical tin to store senses. Okay, so yeah, Manipulator Twinborn would be really good at picking up on subtle body language cues I think. Well, as long as they have enough senses stored up, they could use these body language cues of the other person as hints to know which emotions to riot to get their desired end result. They'd be very good at getting what they want, and as the name implies, manipulating people. I think that these powers build on each other pretty nicely, so I'm going to put it in S tier. Next up, we have Mantis. Mantis Twinborn can use their allomantic duralumin to enhance current metal burned, and they can use their ferrochemical zinc to store mental speed. This is another example of a gnat of the Twinborn world, basically a glorified fairing. Since the Mantis can't burn any other allomantic metals, burning their duralumin doesn't do anything for them. Now, I've seen people speculate that maybe they could burn their allomantic duralumin to somehow increase their ferrochemy. Maybe that could be possible, but the thing with ferrochemy is that you can already use as much as the stored attribute as you want at a time. We see Wax do this in Era 2. He taps so much of his stored weight at once that he becomes heavier than a building, but for a very, very brief amount of time. It's like a second or less. When a ferrochemist taps this much of an attribute at once, they lose a lot of that attribute. So maybe burning duralumin when you compound your ferrochemical attribute like this would make it more efficient, but that's just speculation, so I can't really factor it into this tier ranking. Mantis is going in D tier. The next combination is Jackpot. Jackpot Twinborn can use their allomantic gold to reveal their past self, and they can use their ferrochemical chromium to store fortune. Okay, allomantic gold, as far as we know, isn't very useful. Basically, you burn gold and you will see a gold shadow, another version of yourself. This other version of yourself is the you that you could have been if you made different choices in your past, basically. It's supposed to be a really strange experience. You see through your eyes and the eyes of the gold shadow at the same time, and you think with both minds at the same time. Maybe the gold shadow would know things that you don't because they're a different version of you. I hope we learn more about allomantic gold in future Mistborn books, but as it is right now, it just doesn't seem useful. And then ferrochemical chromium, I already talked about. It would be pretty bad when you're actively storing your fortune, but it could be great when you're tapping it. For me, Jackpot is gonna have to go in C tier. Next, we have Mercurial. Mercurial Twinborn can use their allomantic zinc to riot the emotions of others, and they can use their ferrochemical nigrosyl to store investiture. Ferrochemical nigrosyl is yet another ferrochemical power that we don't know too much about. But basically, it seems like when you're storing your investiture, you're storing the ability to use that investiture, not the investiture itself. So for instance, if this Mercurial Twinborn wanted to store their ability to use allomantic zinc, they could do that. They wouldn't be storing the rioting of emotions. They would just be storing that ability to burn zinc. It's unclear whether they would be left without the ability to burn zinc after they store it in their nigrosyl mind or not, but this could be very useful in the future if a nigrosyl ferrochemist also had access to ferrochemical aluminum so they could store their identity as well. Then they could make their nigrosyl mind unkeyed, and then they could share that ability to burn zinc with others. If ferrochemical nigrosyl is the only ferrochemical ability that you have access to, then it's not that useful. They're going at the top of C tier. Next up, we have Stalker. Stalkers can use their allomantic bronze to hear allomantic pulses, and they can use their ferrochemical bend alloy to store energy. This energy is in the form of nutrition or calories. They can also store water, I guess. So if they're chugging water, they could store it in a bend alloy mine. The name Stalker comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook. Stalkers have the reputation of pursuing their quarry without end. All right, that's actually a pretty good point. I like that reputation. They could be using their allomantic bronze to track down an allomancer, and they'd be able to continually track or stalk this other allomancer for extended periods of time, as long as they had enough attributes stored in their bend alloy mines. That's about the only good combination of these two powers I can think of. I think it's gonna go in B tier for me. Then we have Hindsight. Hindsight Twinborn can use their allomantic gold to reveal their past self, and they can use their ferrochemical tin to store senses. As I said with the other Twinborn type that had allomantic gold, I don't think gold is that useful. I am curious if a Hindsight burns their gold and sees their gold shadow, and then they tap their tin mind, would it increase both their own senses and the gold shadow's senses? That'd be interesting to see. Hindsight is getting ranked pretty low. It's going in C tier. Next up, we have Champion. Champions can use their allomantic pewter to increase their physical strength, and their ferrochemical duralumin lets them store connection. All right, when I imagine a champion Twinborn, I imagine somebody extremely charismatic. And with their allomantic pewter, it not only increases physical strength, it also increases dexterity and prowess, balance, all kind of things. So imagine a champion Twinborn in the Olympics. They could be an amazing athlete and they would get the crowd going crazy as they're tapping their connection. I think ferrochemical duralumin is a pretty good power because it's also good when you're actively storing. It's like an on-off switch if you want to go without socializing for a while. But then whenever you do want to socialize, you can make friends extremely easy. Everybody's gonna like you. I think this is a great combination, to be honest. I don't think champion is quite busted, however, but it is gonna go in S tier for me. And I changed my mind about manipulator. It's gonna drop down to A tier. The next Twinborn combination we have is Cannonball. Cannonballs can use their allomantic steel to push metals, and they can use their ferrochemical pewter to store physical strength. As the name suggests, Cannonball Twinborn would probably just launch themselves into the midst of a battle, and they could tap their ferrochemical pewter to greatly increase their muscle mass, and they would just be duking it out with whoever their enemy is. I think this is actually a pretty good combination too, because, okay, so when you're actively storing your physical strength, your muscles shrink and shrivel up and you look emaciated. So that's gonna make you lighter. That would probably make it easier for you to push yourself around. And then vice versa, when you're tapping your physical strength, your muscles grow. They could grow substantially. You could look basically like a meatball. We see Sazed use this in Era 1 to become like as big as a Koloss. It's pretty crazy. He's looking the Koloss in the eyes, and Koloss are like between 8 to 12 feet tall. When you have more muscle mass, you're gonna be heavier, and that's gonna make it easier to push things around. So this is actually a very good combination in my opinion. Cannonball is gonna go in S tier for me. Next we have Keenai. Keenai Twinborn can use their allomantic tin to increase senses and their ferrochemical chromium to store fortune. The name Keenai comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook, and their reputation is that only fools try to cheat them at cards. Interesting. Yeah, so they would probably be very good at gambling, like playing poker and whatnot. Yeah, I don't know. I still don't really like how detrimental it seems that it would be to store fortune. I'm putting it in B tier behind Slick. Our last Twinborn combination for this video is Instigator. Instigators can use their allomantic zinc to riot the emotions of others, and they can use their ferrochemical electrum to store determination. The name Instigator comes from the Mistborn adventure game rulebook, and instigators have the reputation of being trouble magnets and short-lived. So yeah, ferrochemical electrum is an interesting one. So whenever you're actively storing your determination, you're gonna feel very depressed. You're probably not gonna have the motivation to do anything. You'll probably be super apathetic. But then on the flip side, when you're tapping your determination, you're gonna feel on top of the world. Like you can do anything. The world is your oyster. I think it's pretty similar to bipolar, but you can choose when you're gonna be in a down state and you can choose when you're gonna be in a manic state. So it could be good or bad. And then your allomantic zinc, of course, lets you riot the emotions of others and make it easier to get them to do what you want. I don't like ferrochemical electrum very much. I'm gonna put this in C tier. All right, none of the Twinborn combinations this week made it into the busted tier. Let me know in the comment section if you agree or disagree with my placement of these Twinborn types. Before you go, I want to tell you how you can get a Cosmere book or any book of your choice for free right now as an audiobook, thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Audible. All you have to do is go to audibletrial.com/etc and sign up for a free Premium Plus membership, and you'll get an audiobook to keep, even if you cancel your membership. The Audible membership also gives you access to thousands of audiobooks and podcasts in the Audible Plus catalog. If you're interested in taking advantage of this amazing deal and getting a free audiobook, just use the link in the description below. That's it for this video, guys. I'll see you in part 6.